I'm a warehouse worker for a small business in my city. I'd been in and out of jobs for a while, so this wasn't really a career or anything. I just did what I had to do every night, and that was it. Specifically, I had to unload pallets of shipments that came in and put everything in their designated places in the warehouse. Super simple job. Most of the time, I just put in my earbuds and listened to music while I did it. The warehouse wasn't too big, and very rarely would there be another person working overnight with me. That would only be on the holidays. But this night was just a regular night. I came in, counted the stock, then put my headphones in and started unloading the boxes from the shipments. I started at 10 o'clock. There was probably some time between 12 o'clock and 1 a.m. when a knock echoed through the building. I took my headphones out and listened, but I didn't hear it anymore. The building was old and would creak and groan throughout the night, especially when it was windy outside. But what I thought I heard was clearly someone knocking. I walked down to the back of the building and looked around. Then I went to the front. I didn't see anything inside, so I opened the front door and looked outside. The parking lot was empty, and the night was still and quiet. I shut and locked the door, then went back to work, thinking I must have just misheard it. Being more cautious, though, I left my headphones out for a bit. 20-ish minutes went by before I heard something again. This time, it wasn't a knock, though. It was more of a single thump coming from the front. I hurried down the hallway and up to the front portion of the warehouse. Nothing was there. No signs of anything wrong or anyone at the door. I knew what I heard this time, though, which is why I got kind of nervous. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment and just looked around, silently listening and looking for something, anything, to be the cause of these noises. Standing there, I got a bad gut feeling, like something wasn't right. I walked up to the front door and leaned on it to look out at the parking lot again. But as I put my weight on the door, it swung open with ease. I stumbled forward, not expecting it. It was almost as if the door wasn't locked or even latched at all. Yet I had checked and locked it not even a half hour ago. I looked at the door and then saw the latch lying broken on the ground in front of me. My stomach tightened, and I felt my adrenaline suddenly spike. Not even a second later, I heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing from the dim hallway behind me. I quickly went out the door and into the parking lot, still in a dazed and unsure state. Once I was a good distance from the door, I turned around. Barely visible through the glass, the shape of a figure walked up to the other side. They moved around for a moment, definitely looking at me, then they walked away. I called the cops as soon as I could and waited in the parking lot, but I never saw any more movement in the building. When they arrived, they found that he had left through the back door. It seems like they couldn't figure out anything else to help solve the case. A few things showed up missing, but nothing substantial. Honestly, I think it was probably just from a wrong stock count. Regardless of whether anything was stolen, to break the latch, he must have had some kind of tool or weapon, which only made the whole thing more scary. They also moved the door back to look like it was closed, knowing it would keep me from figuring out what was going on. Maybe if I hadn't noticed the door was broken, I would have come face to face with whoever that man was. I have no way of knowing how that would have turned out. Although unlikely, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was coming after me for some reason. So, I've since left that job and moved on, hoping I don't run into him again. I was 20 and worked with my parents at a really small takeout restaurant. We specialized in to-go orders. I was in college at the time and had a very hectic schedule, but my parents were kind enough to offer me a laid-back position, just as a general worker. I usually worked the to-go table or cleaned up the place after closing hours. This was during early December, and with finals coming up, I didn't have much time to work during the day. So, I was taking up mostly late-night shifts where I just clean for a few hours and then head home. One of the nights I was working, I noticed around an hour into my shift that a car was parked in the parking lot. The way our restaurant was laid out, it was a standalone shop with a tiny parking lot in front of it. So there was no crossover between other stores or businesses. I thought whoever parked there probably just didn't think anyone would care. And they were right, because I really didn't care. 20 or so minutes later, they left. However, the next night, around the same time, the car pulled into the parking lot again. The first time it was fine because I thought it was just a one-time thing, but coming back again was strange. I walked up to the front of the building and looked out. It was an older gray sedan with dark windows. They didn't seem to be trying to hide or anything, because they were facing right at the building and kept their headlights on. I double-checked that the doors were locked before getting back to cleaning. It was hard not to feel like they were watching me through the giant glass front windows. But just like last time, they left not too long after I finished up my work and clocked out. An hour later, walking to my car in the parking lot, I felt really uneasy. I knew they had left, but it was just concerning that the same car came by 2 nights in a row for seemingly no reason. I drove home and got some rest, having a lot of schoolwork to do. I decided to take off the next night, so I didn't return to work until the following night. The whole time I was inside cleaning, I had this anxious feeling that made me constantly look out the windows, expecting that car to come back at any point. But I never saw them pull in. I was inside for nearly 3 hours and finished everything I had to do. Not having seen the car that night, I felt like maybe it really was all nothing. I packed my stuff up and headed out, locking the door behind me. As I walked through the parking lot, that anxious and uneasy feeling rushed back to me. It felt like I suddenly got a burst of adrenaline, making me sweat and look in all directions. Then, as I was halfway across and standing out in the open, my eyes spotted a car sitting in the far back of the parking lot, away from all the street lamps that lit up the area. Within seconds, it started moving quickly, driving toward me. I sprinted to my car, but I could hear their tires skidding on the pavement as they sped up right beside me and slammed on the brakes. I stumbled forward, thinking they were about to hit me. I was only a few feet away from my car at this point. Suddenly, the doors of their car swung open. I didn't even turn my head to look, having my focus completely on getting into my car. Footsteps rushed behind me just as I opened my car and got in. Through the windows, I saw 3 men wearing masks and hoodies sprinting up to me. My hands were shaking as I tried to get my car to turn on. The men started banging on the windows and trying to get the doors open, but I barely got it in drive and drove past them. I got out of the parking lot and onto the road, and from there, I was safe. I called 911 and pulled into a well-lit gas station nearby to wait for them. Unfortunately, the outside of our shop didn't have any cameras, so the information the police had to go off of was minimal. I couldn't even see any of the men's faces. After that night, it's no surprise that I never saw the car or the men again. I worked at a 24/7 fast food restaurant a few years back when I was in college. The job wasn't fun or enjoyable in any way, and most of my coworkers were middle-aged people with no personalities. I was doing school online though, which meant I had more time to work, so I was cranking out 40 hours a week at least. I even got a promotion to shift lead after a few months. What I didn't realize when I took the promotion was that I was signing up to officially be a full-time employee, which meant they could make me work any shift. Not even a week into it, they put me on overnights, and I couldn't even argue it. Overnights were a pain in the ass because I'd be the only one there, so if the drive-thru got backed up, then I'd be hustling nonstop without any breaks. On the flip side though, sometimes it would be completely dead, and I'd just be standing around all night on my phone. This was one of those nights. I was in the back of the kitchen, sitting on a pile of boxes and scrolling through my phone, just trying to pass the time when my headset rang to alert me that a customer was in the drive-thru. I got up and went to the computer, then asked what they would like to order. Nobody said anything, so I turned and looked up at the drive-thru camera. The lane was empty, no cars in the drive-thru or even in the parking lot around the restaurant. The system never really falsely beeps like that, though there was a slight storm outside, so I figured a raindrop or a flash of light must have tripped the sensor somehow. I stayed by the drive-thru window for a few minutes, and my headset beeped again. This time, I quickly looked at the cameras and caught a man walking past the drive-thru lane. He was wearing a thick hoodie and a face covering, but quickly walked out of the camera's view. Where the restaurant was, there wasn't anywhere else he could have parked or walked from unless he was walking on the side of the main road. I watched the cameras to see if he'd come back, but after 10 minutes of no activity, I just went back to my phone. Another 15 minutes went by before I got another beep, and when I checked the cameras, that same man was there. But this time, he was standing in the drive-thru lane. "Can I help you, sir?" After a moment, he started reciting an order for a small meal. I wasn't supposed to serve people in the drive-thru unless they were in a vehicle, so I told him I couldn't accept his order. He stood there, letting the rain soak him, as he just looked at the screen and didn't speak. I thought about telling him to leave, but I didn't want to escalate things if I didn't have to, so I just waited. After a minute, he started walking down the drive-thru lane toward the side of the restaurant where the window was. I rushed over and latched the window shut. Not even a second later, the man appeared outside. He had his hood and mask still on, but he looked to be in his late 40s with long black hair and a dead look in his eyes. He watched me through the window and stood outside like he was waiting for me to talk to him. There was something about his look that really freaked me out and kept me from speaking. Then he softly said, "Open up." I nervously said no and just stayed where I was while the man continued looking at me. He said it again and knocked on the window. But after a few seconds, he turned and, as he walked away, a loud scraping sound ran along the side of the building. I checked the cameras to make sure he left, and luckily he didn't come back. During the next hour of my shift, though, I kept thinking about that scraping sound. I decided to take out the trash to the dumpster and take a quick look. Under the drive-thru window was a long scratch, looking like it was made from a knife dragging along the building. I called the police after that, but the man couldn't be identified from the grainy camera footage, mixed with the heavy rain and fog. The man never turned up, and I'll never know exactly what he was planning on doing that night. But seeing as he had a knife ready in his hand, I assumed that if I had taken his order and opened that window, then that would have been the last thing I would have ever done.